Well, welcome to the Scaling the Ocean podcast, episode 2. And are you ready? Political chaos does not benefit trade. That's the subject of today's podcast. And today's guest, Rosemary Coates, the executive director of the Reshoring Institute and president of Blue Silk Consulting, a global supply chain strategist with more than 30 years of experience. She has held leadership roles at SAP, KPMG, and Hewlett-Packard, and has advised companies around the world on manufacturing, outsourcing, and reshoring strategy. Yes, we searched the world. Rosemary is also a best-selling author of not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 books. 5, count them. A university instructor and expert witness in international supply chain disputes. I am not worthy. Rosemary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Not all 5 were bestsellers, by the way. Just one.
Well, yeah, of course, right? But no, I have to give credit where credit is due. But before we get started, a word from our sponsor, Think Partners Advisory. In a world of shifting trade policy, geopolitical tension, and supply chain disruption, entering or expanding into the U.S. market is now more complex than ever. Think Partners Advisory works with UK and European leadership teams to deliver clarity, reduce risk, and turn uncertainty into practical, actionable market entry strategy. Learn more at thinkpartnersadvisory.com. Now, back to the program. Rosemary, I thank you for coming on to the podcast today.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm delighted to be here. Any way I can help.
In full disclosure, I had the opportunity to work with Rosemary for a short time, a little while ago. We won't say how long ago. And I can tell you when this topic first came up, Rosemary, you were the first one I thought of. We got to get Rosemary on the phone. We've got to talk about this.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've been working on getting manufacturing back to the U.S. for going on 15 years now.
You're doing the Lord's work, as we like to say. If you don't mind my saying.
Yeah. I guess you could put it that way. Yeah. Well, it's sort of penance for the many years I spent offshoring to China, and so now we're trying to bring things back. I think it's an appropriate time.
Well, global supply chain strategies are shifting. I guess to kick it off out of the gate, notwithstanding, of course, the wonderful world of supply chain, what we're here to talk about today are politics, because we live in a world of political and economic uncertainty. So let's set the stage, if you will. What are the implications of this volatility and its effect on international trade?
Yeah, well, as you can imagine, it's been a whirlwind, maybe a roller coaster even, of trade and what's happened in the global supply chains over this past year because of the whipsaw effect of the tariffs. And it's really caused a lot of changes, a lot of movement around the world with companies trying to determine what's the proper location or the best location or the multiple locations for manufacturing.
Do you mean, here's your tariff, now you see it, now you don't?
Exactly.
This has an effect on markets? I don't understand, Rosemary. Why is that?
Yeah, you have to wake up every morning and check it out and see if there's any new tariffs or if they went up or down or, what's happening there. And boy, that causes a lot of uncertainty for businesses. And the one thing businesses really hate is uncertainty.
So obviously you've worked with organizations large and small. Who feels this the most in these markets? The large multinationals or the small, medium enterprise firms, or does this uncertainty have an equal impact on both those groups?
Yeah, I think both of the groups and us as consumers as well. So, some of the larger corporations have enough staff and they can consider a new program, evaluate where in the world to manufacture, understand and keep track of the various tariffs, how that affects their imports and the export market too. Because remember, we put a lot of tariffs in place, but all these other countries put retaliatory tariffs in as well. So it affects both imports and exports for most companies. But I think the biggest impact has been in small and medium-sized businesses. That's where they're dependent on a lot of imports, and the swings in what's happening, what the tariff rate is going to be, has caused a lot of consternation in moving forward, I guess I would say. We did a study for the state of New York a few months ago. They asked us to help the manufacturers in New York determine what to do about the tariffs. And so we interviewed 18 CEOs or executives across America, not just in New York, but all across America. They were all C-level executives. And we asked them, what are you doing about the tariffs? And to a person, every single one of these executives said absolutely nothing, that they were stuck. They were uncertain of the environment. They didn't know whether tariffs were going up or down. And so they were not making any investment. They were not hiring. They were just stuck and trying to figure out what to do. Now, fast forward to today, we just posted job numbers that look pretty good, but they're still lackluster overall. So I think, while there might be some movement, there's still hesitation in hiring and going forward.
I know. I'll play the opposite side of the argument today. Okay, so politics has been a nightmare for decades. Some would say hundreds of years. Some would say longer than that, right? So politics has always been a problem. What's changed in the past 10 years that has made this matter worse?
Yeah, well, sure. Politics has been around forever. And that with every change in administration, there are changes in the approach to the marketplace, particularly in manufacturing. And that's because for every single job that's added in manufacturing has a 4x magnifier effect on the economy. So it's by far the biggest. So what happens is, if you put someone to work in a manufacturing environment that pays a pretty good living wage, and manufacturing usually does, at least minimum or beyond minimum wage, the people that work in manufacturing then make a decent salary. They buy houses, they buy cars, they put their kids through college, they visit the local beauty shop or the grocery store. And it has a very positive effect. And that's why you often see politicians talking about job growth. And so most administrations will focus on policies regarding jobs. The difference is because of this uncertainty, and because we couldn't depend on whether the tariff was going to be, in China, 145%, or the next day, 30%, or what it is. It's really hard to make a decision in that kind of environment.
So, okay, all right, fair enough. But tariffs have been around for a long time, and different countries, as you suggest, place tariffs on other countries, retaliatory tariffs and such. So how has that changed in the past 10 years? Why is that so much more dramatic today?
Well, tariffs have been around for a while, for sure, but not the huge swings that we've seen. If you think back to your maybe elementary school or high school civics class, in 1929, Senator Smoot and Representative Hawley set up or proceeded with introducing a Tariff Act of 1930, and it was passed by the Congress and then by the Senate and signed into law by Herbert Hoover. And that put a 20% tariff on most goods coming into the U.S. Some of them were a little bit higher, but by and large, it averaged out to about 20%. Most economists will tell you that while those tariffs did not create the Great Depression, they certainly made it more severe, and that was not only in the U.S. but around the world. So the Great Depression was not just captured within the United States; it was really the whole world. And what happened then is that countries around the world, including Mexico and Canada, retaliated with their own tariffs on the U.S. And so really drove the Great Recession, the Great Depression, downward. It made it much, much worse than it probably would have been without those tariffs. So, yeah, I mean, there's a long history, but we also know that tariffs are generally put on countries or on commodities at a small percentage rate, a small increase rate, or used as countervailing duties or some other approach to trade that will punish for some reason on some commodity. Like, for example, solar panels coming in from China had countervailing duty for several years. And that was to punish what was happening in terms of dumping products into the U.S. under value. But by and large, those tariffs, when they're enacted by Congress or passed by Congress, might be slight increases or slight decreases. The problem here are the swings and the unpredictability. And so when you have an unpredictable environment and you don't know what's happening around the world or in the country where you're manufacturing, well, what happens is companies just don't do anything. They don't make further decisions or investments. They say, let's wait another 6 months and see what happens.
Wow. So this affects small, medium businesses more, right? They're less able, less resilient to dramatic shifts. Of course, their revenue and costs are less resilient. Yet these executives are still accountable to the numbers, to the revenue, to the profit, right? Day to day, month to month. They can't sit on their hands for 6 months. And who knows if it's going to be resolved in 6 months. They still have to run their business.
Yes.
How do you advise small and medium enterprises to adapt to these radical shifts in trade policy?
So it's interesting that you say that, because what has happened and what we're seeing is that small and medium-sized businesses are starting to make more informed decisions and using more variables during that decision-making process. So in the early 2000s, I was spent lots of time offshoring to China. I helped so many clients find sources or completely set up new manufacturing in China or implement systems in China. I mean, everyone was moving to China. I can't tell you how many executives I sat with that said, just get me to China. My competitors are there. I know it's cheaper. Let's go, and I knew how to do that. So I had a lot of work over 15 years or so helping companies offshore to China. Fast forward to today, and mostly triggered by the pandemic, and also the presidential election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney in 2012. They were both China bashing like crazy, and it shifted the thought process about whether or not we could bring manufacturing back. But then, of course, the pandemic really exposed supply chain risk. So back to what decisions are being made by small and medium-sized businesses. They're looking at making decisions on where in the world to manufacture or source based on the knowledge, or what information is available today. And what I'm seeing is most of these companies have a lot more variables input into that decision, and they are often choosing multiple locations to source and to manufacture. So in the past, everybody went to China. We bought stuff from China and, we manufactured there. Now it's more likely to see manufacturing done partially somewhere in Asia. Most companies are trying to get out of China right now, but I would say somewhere in Asia, maybe some in Mexico, and maybe, somewhere in Eastern Europe. So it's what we call a China plus one or a China plus two strategy. that companies will now mitigate their risk by having multiple locations.
Is as you suggest, China is no longer the number one priority? Do you think that's due more to risk factors that have been revealed within the Chinese market itself, or just because other geographic locations have become more attractive, resulting in the China plus one strategy? Is it running away from China, or is it an additive strategy in addition to?
I guess some of each. I think it's a general consensus that China presents a risky place to do business right now. Partly that's because of geopolitics. Partly it's because the pandemic soured a lot of companies on sole sourcing or sole manufacturing in China. Recognizing that there is risk in these long global supply chains. And, it's just kind of a general movement, I think, where companies are rethinking that strategy. The other thing is over the past 20 years or so, China's cost structure has significantly increased. So here's another thing. We did a study, and all of this is available on our website, but we did a study a couple of years ago. We looked at labor rates in 12 different countries. So for 10 job categories like machine operator, manufacturing supervisor, we had 10 categories of jobs. And we compared the labor rates in 12 markets. So the US and Western Europe and Eastern Europe and China and across Asia. And what we found was China right now, in terms of labor rates, is smack in the middle.
Wow.
They are no longer the cheapest place to go and manufacture.
Okay.
And so the cheaper places are Vietnam, India, Mexico. And that's where you see companies moving right now. Particularly Mexico is very popular right now. So Mexico is sort of becoming the new China.
But wow, I did not know that. And that's a very dramatic shift. So when you were speaking to China as a location of geopolitical risk, I was thinking to myself, did she mean to say the U.S. as a source of geopolitical risk? How would you gauge? Honestly, truth be told, when you and I don't know what geopolitical risk means, but let's use that as a phrase. How would you gauge China versus U.S. currently in terms of that expression, geopolitical risk?
Well, geopolitics, I mean, we're no longer in an isolated situation. It isn't just, what the U.S. wants and somebody reacts. I mean, it's very integrated. Our economies are integrated, and not just with China, but around the world. So now it's a cause and effect relationship. If you press on one part of the country, the other part suffers, and it's back and forth. It's a completely different, complex decision today than it was 20 years ago. So, so that's when we're talking about geopolitical risk, it's not just China. It could be a disruption somewhere else, Ukraine. We had clients that were manufacturing in Eastern Europe, and when Russia invaded Ukraine, they were like scared, is Poland next? And, what do we do about Ukraine? Ukraine, for example, here's another good example. Ukraine supplies the majority of neon gas around the world. So they have a lot of raw materials, and neon gas is one of them. Neon gas is required in the manufacturing process for semiconductors. So it's used to etch the semiconductors.
Wow.
And when war broke out with Ukraine, we instantly had semiconductor shortages around the world because it couldn't get neon gas. And so it took a while to rebuild supply chains around the world in order to address that as a shortage. So it isn't just China, but it could be anywhere. There could be a flood or a fire or wildfire in the Western US. I live in Silicon Valley, and wildfires are just really scary every year, and so the potential for affecting supply chains like that is very real. And that now becomes the forefront of determining where to manufacture, especially if you have a global integrated supply chain.
So, okay, so we talked geopolitical risk China, we talked geopolitical risk US. Let's turn our sights on the UK and the European market. I think I still have to separate those, right? We have to refer to those two separate markets. How would you gauge current geopolitical risk of those markets?
Yeah, I think, Western Europe seems to be fairly stable, although they're just like the others are dealing with tariffs and retaliatory tariffs and different trade agreements with the U.S. All of that's been turned upside down. So it isn't that you can't make a decision. You can, but you have to understand there's risk involved. And, how do you mitigate that risk so you don't have giant swings in your profit margins and the cost structures? So, I think Europe is certainly more stable than the U.S. economy. But we're integrated. It's integrated economy. So what happens in the U.S. is going to affect the world. What's that phrase? If the America sneezes, the whole world coughs or suffers, something like that.
It's a cold, yes.
Yeah. So it is, and it is really true. It's especially the last 20 or 25 years where these economies are definitely integrated.
A fully integrated market. That is phenomenal. I had not given that due consideration, but technology, here we are. We have the ability to communicate. We have the ability to ship goods. That's something that we have to take into account. So in your opinion, and I'm going to ask this question without knowing the answer, which is very risky. The European market, UK, US, China, Asia, what is the current hot market? You mentioned a few of them already. Who's the current hot market in terms of manufacturing?
Oh, I would say definitely Mexico.
Okay.
So, Mexico is an up-and-comer. It's certainly not as sophisticated as China. They don't have the infrastructure like China has. But there's a lot of investment being made in the manufacturing sector in China. In Mexico. They have a pretty good capabilities and have become more and more sophisticated over time. And they also have a new president, Claudia Sheinbaum. She was elected about a year ago and is very pro-business. So she has indicated that they're going to build 100 industrial parks, these big industrial parks where you've got, 20 companies manufacturing in one area, and there's tax breaks and, there's all kinds of things. So they're building these new industrial parks. So that's one thing. And then, she's very focused on getting rid of corruption, particularly in the cross-border trade. And I think, overall, that's a very positive environment. So they're up and coming in terms of sophistication, up and coming in terms of building infrastructure. And because, the proximity to the U.S. market is there, you can essentially drive across the border. You don't have to put things in containers on the ocean. USMCA was the trade agreement between Mexico, the U.S., and Canada that really allowed, over the last 20 years or so, allowed imports and exports to come in duty-free between the three countries, provided it was the growth of that particular country or one of the three countries. And it's up for renegotiation in July. And I know Trump is not very happy about it. And so, we may have a change in what happens with that trade policy. But in the past, in the past 20 years, having zero duty rate is really an advantage. And so now you look at, incoming products from China, for example, roughly 65% duty rate. And around the world, they're averaging 30-40% duty. And Mexico is zero. So, it's a real cost advantage to go to Mexico.
Any predictions for the July renegotiation, difficult as that might be?
Yeah, I think the U.S. is probably going to back out of the agreement and do bilateral agreements with the countries. I think it's USMCA has worked very well over the past few years, but the idea is to build manufacturing in America, and the tool that Trump is using is the tariffs to do that.
So I can't resist. I think the Supreme Court is taking a look at this issue with the president's power of the tariffs. Any predictions on how the court may fall out based on precedent, on whether or not they'll put an end to that power?
Yeah, I mean, you're referring to IEPA, and traditionally, and in the Constitution, it says that Congress is responsible for putting taxes and tariffs on incoming goods. But the president used the War Powers Act to say we're at war with the rest of the world because they've taken our manufacturing away. And so he used that to apply tariffs on, how he felt it was important to do that. And so that's being challenged up to the Supreme Court. Now, there have been 3 lower courts that have made a decision saying, no, that's illegal. And the Congress has the power, not the president. And it was referred to the Supreme Court, and we're expecting a decision any day now. I think it's almost overdue. Generally, I think the Supreme Court will determine that it's illegal for the president to apply the tariffs. And now that's going to trigger refunds for all of these companies that have been paying tariffs over the last year. So a lot of my clients are, added staff to address how do they apply for all these refunds. It's not easy. And you can't just, dial up customs and say, okay, give me a refund. There's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of kind of proof of what you brought in, how you brought it in, how it was determined, how it was classified. And if, there's a lot of work to be done if that happens and we get refunds. Now, the Supreme Court may rule no, the president does have the power because of the economic situation. So I guess we'll see.
Well, so, boy, I suppose if Congress were in charge of tariffs, they would move slower, and there wouldn't be so much, is the word tumult? There wouldn't be so much chaos, because Congress can't move fast. Does that present a better solution long-term for handling such things?
I think so, yes. And usually Congress makes those decisions based on economic analysis and backup. So really determining, when and where to apply tariffs. The Department of Commerce would impose anti-dumping and countervailing duty tariffs. I mean, there's more analysis and background versus, the president has a rule of thumb, right? Just this deciding today it's 35% and tomorrow it's 40%. I heard on the news yesterday that he had talked to a small country, I guess, and the female president. They didn't identify the country, but Trump said, he was talking to this woman, president, on the phone. And he said he couldn't get her off the phone. She was begging him to take the tariffs down, saying, they couldn't afford it and all that. And he said, she really annoyed me. So instead of reducing tariffs, I increased it.
I heard that story. I don't remember who the country was, but I remember that story.
Well, I don't think they identified who the country was. So, I mean, that kind of decision-making is not based in analysis or economic factors. So, my preference would be to move that back to the Congress and even though it's slow, let them do their job to determine what's appropriate and what isn't.
Assuming they operate without corruption, which is a whole separate subject. We'll cover that on a separate episode. Yeah. That's a whole separate episode. But okay, let's talk about the impact that this is having on firms that are considering coming into the U.S. because the U.S. is a big market, right? Who doesn't want to enter the U.S.? But these are very real costs. Tariffs, dumping, policy shifts, regulatory divergence. How do managers quantify the costs with dealing with these matters? How do they go about that process?
Yeah, I think in today's environment, if you're coming to the US, first of all, we have such a huge market and it looks very attractive to most companies to come here and to try to sell your products here. And there's, potentially a lot of money to be made in doing that. But I think you have to go in with your eyes open, thinking that it's risky also, just because of the what's happening and the tariffs, the structures, the um, changes in the regulatory environment. I would say for most businesses, a reduction in the regulatory environment is going to be favorable. And most businesses want less regulation, not more.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, yeah. So
trust us. We're doing. We'll be fine.
Yeah. And so the Trump administration is really focused on reducing those kind of regulations. They've been fairly successful at doing that. So that's helpful. But, the point I was making in the very beginning is it used to be a fairly straightforward decision. Let's go to America because it's a good market, right? Today's environment, it's let's go to America, but we got to go in with our eyes open and know that there's volatility. And to assume that risk, I mean, you have to take on that risk because it's a different time and place.
I would summarize that by saying it's not for the faint of heart.
Right, that's right, for sure.
Are there some markets? It's one thing to sell shoes in this market, open up restaurants, perhaps a hotel, but manufacturing. Opening up a manufacturing plant, that takes years, right? That's a heck of a commitment. Are there some market in this type of chaotic environment, are there some markets that might do better than others in terms of those factors of timing and investment capital required in order to make those moves?
Are you talking about within the U.S. or worldwide?
Yeah, within the U.S.
Yeah, so within the U.S., so I think, one of the first things we do with our clients is to look at their costed bill of materials. So we say, let's have a look at what it costs you to produce this product. Where are the raw materials coming from? So where are you sourcing these raw materials? Because sometimes they can only be sourced one place, right? Or you have two places as alternatives. So your sources may not be in the US. In fact, most of them probably are not, especially if you have electronics involved in your products. Those are coming from Asia, mostly China, mostly the Pearl River Valley, just west and north of Hong Kong. That's the factory of the world for electronics. So if you have electronics, you've got to understand where is it coming from? What are the tariff rates? What's happening in that environment? Is there going to be a shift, or can you move those sources to other places that might be more favorable? All of that. Plus, you have to look at the labor that's involved. So if 50% or more of your product involves labor, and that could be because you're assembling products or you have to do manual testing or something like that. If the cost of that product is 50% or more related to labor, then you want to look for a low-cost labor market. If you're looking strictly at the U.S., that's generally the South or rural areas across America. Rural Utah, for example, happens to be a very inexpensive place. Problem with rural environments is the employment base, the labor base is really small, right? So really hard to find a good bioengineer in, some rural location somewhere. So, there are decisions like that in location. But as a general rule, what we guide our clients to is there's a lot of manufacturing being grown in the South, and then sort of near major cities, like maybe 20 miles outside of a city, there's usually a difference in labor rates there. So the cities across America have one labor rate, and then the other areas have different labor rates.
Yes.
Well, it was surprising to me. We did a study last year on labor rates across America, which is also published on our website. And, it was funny. I mean, you'd think there'd be one standard minimum wage, but there isn't. So, for example, San Francisco is almost $20 an hour.
Yeah.
Alabama and parts of Georgia are $7 an hour. Texas, 707, I think,
Right.
dollars per hour. So if you've got a lot of labor content in your product, you got to look at places like that, and right, it's going to be important. And some of the states have provided a very ambitious business environment, manufacturing environment. The Carolinas, for example, North Carolina, very attractive business environment. Utah is another place, Texas. So you want to look at that. Now, if you've got a product that's fully automated, right, so that you can manufacture your goods with robots or with technology, and you have a whole different cost structure. And now, if you can make that capital investment in a manufacturing plant, you have lots of places to choose from in terms of where to locate. So
Energy cost becomes more of a factor too.
yeah, exactly. So that's the first step that we work with our clients on, is to understand their cost structures and then make appropriate decisions based on what they can or can't automate.
And it's a globally interconnected world, and it's getting smaller and smaller. So it's not Indiana versus North Carolina; it's Indiana versus the world.
Right, exactly. And then in the United States, we have this unique situation where each state has tax, right? It's different. It's like 50 different countries. We've got, federal tax, but then we have state and local tax as well. And we also have state and local incentives. So some places will offer big tax incentives or tax breaks, employment, training, money, all kinds of things to try to attract manufacturing, because, as I mentioned before, manufacturing has a 4x times effect on the local economy. It's very attractive to have manufacturing in your area, particularly if manufacturing is kind of a clean manufacturing. We're not, well, long ago, my grandfather worked at Hawsey Taylor in Warren, Ohio. He was a metal worker. And he would come home from work and he was smelly and dirty and then grease under his fingernails. It was gross, you didn't want to get near him. And that was our idea of manufacturing in the past. I live in Silicon Valley, and manufacturing looks like people in white bunny suits, right?
Yes.
With respirators, so you don't contaminate the electronics environment. So manufacturing has changed for sure. And so what, we like to attract here and rebuild is this more sophisticated manufacturing. It's cleaner. It's not going to have so much environmental impact. It puts people to work, and the jobs are more sophisticated, requiring more skills, and they pay better. So we're seeing that kind of shift, that kind of movement.
So, wow, there's a lot there. Your credentials are showing. If I might be so bold. We've been working with an organization by the name of Gambika, representing the laboratory instrumentation manufacturers in the UK market. These nonprofits exist, of course, to support the businesses that they represent, with, of course, a whole range of services, from business to the political, trade, lobbying, and so on and so forth, in different capacities. In a globally interconnected world, do organizations like this continue to have a role? How can they help companies, if they can, navigate these waters, or is that role beginning to shift?
Well, it should be pretty clear at this point that it's complicated, right? Those decisions are not easy or straightforward, and I think it's quite advantageous for companies to leverage expertise and, to use consultants, to use companies that can help them with these decisions, because these companies, consultants in particular, are aware of the various pieces, the moving pieces, and where there's vulnerability. So, I think companies should engage with a helper of some kind or another, whether that's a individual consultant or a company that is going to be able to assist them in making this kind of complicated decision.
Makes sense. It makes sense. Okay, final question, final Jeopardy. Forgive the reference. If you were advising UK or European executive today in the current chaotic political and trade environment, what single principle, what single strategy would you suggest, if you had to nail it, if you could only pick one, to help guide their decision making?
Well, that's a good question because it's complicated, like I said. But I think the one thing I would recommend is you gotta find a good advisor, somebody that can help you through this process, somebody that knows what it's going to take to develop a new manufacturing site in the U.S. Understands what the state and local environments are like. How do you take the best advantage of tax rates and of incentive offerings? Where should you locate in order to take advantage of those things? So, for example, I worked with a water purification company to find a new factory in the U.S. They were located in the U.K. They had a very sophisticated, beautiful factory in China, but they were trying to sell their products. They make the water filtration, like when you fill up your water bottle at the airport, those kind of machines, they make those. Yes. But they had an advanced technology. And they were trying to sell their products to the U.S. government. And in order to do that, you have to manufacture in the U.S. And so we helped them for over a year to find a location in the U.S. They ended up picking a location near the Dallas-Fort Worth airport, partly because they had so many international travelers and they needed a location where they could fly into directly. So that was a big factor. Another factor is they needed biochemical engineers, and there are some big programs, university programs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area that could supply those kind of technical resources. So, that decision was based on the particulars of that company. But, another company might be looking at cost structures. They strictly want to go where it's less expensive. Another company may say, well, we're just selling in the northeastern corridor, so we want to be close to our customers. So, the variables are different from company to company in making that decision.
No, that's sound advice. Well, and I think that's a great point to conclude. I have to say, Rosemary, on behalf of the Scaling the Ocean podcast, thank you for sharing your expertise today.
Sure, you're welcome. Anytime.
And on behalf of Think Partners, our sponsor at Think Partners Advisory, thank you. We will, of course, include all of Rosemary's contact details in the caption, links to her 5 books, the very impressive. If you have further questions for her, please feel free to reach out. She has a great deal of knowledge to share, so a very small portion of which we share today. Looking forward to the next episode of Scaling the Ocean. Stay tuned. Peace.